Hi, friends. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Clouds Edge to Edge Transformation. And this transformation is happening at many levels, not just the technology that's changing us. We are also changing the technology, and we're trying to find that harmonious relationship between work and life and between technology and humans. Doug, tell us about your journey. How did you end up becoming the Doug Walton we know today?
I originally started with a very strong interest in technology as a kid. My father was one of the early inventors of elevator controls using integrated circuits and used to bring that work home, and he had a side business repairing some of these elevator parts and things, and I got involved in it. In those days, it was very rare. We had a lot of integrated circuits at home, printed circuit boards, and I used to help repair them as a teenager, and got involved with him in amateur radio. So I had those leanings toward technology from an early age, was interested in robots as a kid and tried to build robots out of motorized toys, build controllers from integrated circuits to control them. We didn't have quite the understanding of software that we have now today, so it was more of a hardware effort in those days. Later, as I went out into life and started my career, I found that my father had so well prepared me, I easily got a job as a technician at a semiconductor company. So I was quickly on my way just from learning at home to being a technician. I became an engineer on IBM 370 peripherals for Memorex. And so I was working in engineering, got interested in management. I was working for Convergent Technologies. They were acquired by Unisys, and then everything just went south. But in the process of it going south, I became involved in efforts that Unisys was making to transform itself into a better company. And I really was an eye-opening thing for me, and I became very interested in how would we save a company like this. Was a huge company, billions of dollars and tens of thousands of people there, and it was failing, and everyone knew it was failing for years. And they struggled to try to reverse it, but they were largely unsuccessful. But I became very interested in how do you do these transformations successfully. Got involved with the work of Peter Senge and the fifth discipline, went to graduate school to get a degree in organizational systems, a PhD, in how do we transform these systems, and then returned to Cisco. I found that very interesting because I went to school for 5 years, intensely studying transformation methods, and I thought, okay, I now know everything to know. This will be great. I can go in, I can help everybody change, and then found out that there's a lot of pushback even to the scientifically well-known methods of organizational change. You run into a few problems. One is managers just often don't believe them. They disagree with established science. Sometimes I like to say the biggest resistance you get is from your own team when you're trying to do a change. And then the second thing I learned, though, which was surprising to me, is that sometimes the research stuff just doesn't play that well on the front lines. In a real setting, there's not time. Time is limited. Labor is short. You don't have time to do everything, assess things as perfectly as would be advised, or to do the kind of research. I think one example I was thinking of earlier was, we always like to say it's good to do history, to do the history of the project, or like after action review. How many times does it really happen? Well, sometimes it happens. How much times does anything really change? Probably very rare. For a while, there was a study, we used to advocate in adherence of the learning organization to do like a detailed review of what went wrong. No one ever does that. There's not time. They've moved on to another project. So there's just practical limitations that I learned, that we have to find a way to balance the practical application and still bring in what's actual science. And in the world of organizational change, there's a lot of mythology, a lot of non-science that's posed as science. So I tried to bring what is actually the science in a practical way. So that's kind of was the start of it. It resulted in a book eventually, and a consulting practice where we try to do consulting and organizational change and building change capability in a way that's consistent with well-researched principles of human behavior, and at the same time is a practical method for companies to implement.
So you went from amateur radios to communicating with large networks, telecom, to large computer networks. What was that like from the time when you're tinkering around with amateur radios to all these huge networks?
When I started graduate school, I had a mentor. I had been thinking of technology just mainly as computers. I built small computers. I made a tic-tac-toe computer as a kid out of integrated circuits. So I was thinking of it that way, not really in a communication technology perspective. And I submitted an essay to get into graduate school on issues with public discourse. I was just imagining how technology might affect them. One of the professors at the school called me up and said, I want you to be in my program. He just kind of adopted me into this program. And I studied with him for many years and actually took over his nonprofit when he passed away. He was a very smart guy who studied social systems and had written books on how do we change social systems. Most of these methods is very hard to scale without some kind of technology. So we came together around the idea of how would you use technology to scale the collective, collaborative social systems design. My dissertation was on rational case tools for social change. How do you facilitate the conversation? How do you keep it on track? How do we bring together different design ideas? Then I went to Cisco, did try a whole bunch of those ideas at Cisco and work with Dinesh on some of these ideas when we used to call global open space, and have learned a lot over the years, still learning. How do we coordinate large-scale collaborative design? It's a big interest of mine.
I think it was Peter Drucker who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Right, yeah.
And pointed out something very interesting. Culture change is one of the hardest things. What are the challenges and what were your successes like?
There are a couple different kinds of change. There's change, which is we're deploying some new security technologies, kind of a flash cut, and there you go. There's process change, like you're deploying a SAP or something like that. There's a process embedded. You kind of know what the best practice is. You kind of know what you want. But culture change is a different kind of animal that requires you to think using a different methodological approach. Rather than thinking, oh, we're going to make a case for change, we're going to communicate, train everybody, declare success. Culture change is more of a, you have to pull rather than push. You do that with the greater focus on incentives, for one thing, giving people the skills to make the right decision at the right time. Culture change is not like a process where you just say, hey, when you get thing X comes in your inbox, do this and send it out Y. It's not that concrete what your behavior would be. Somebody has to say, oh, I'm going to have to make the right decision based on their own evaluation of what it is. So like collaboration, they have to decide what's the right way to be collaborative in this situation. You can't prescribe it for everyone. So you can give them the training. Then, of course, the big thing that we focus on a lot is the importance of peer networks, people influencing other people. Most of the people who are involved in a culture change adopt the change because their neighbor was doing it. That's not strictly true, but as a general idea, you're creating a system where a few people adopted it and then the rest of the people followed them. That person doing it convinced the person it was all right. Message from the CEO might not have the same effect. The neighbors doing it, that really influenced them.
So very true. It cannot be mandated top down. Now that we have these intelligent machines all around us, whether it's a chat GPT or it's deep learning algorithms, so there's going to be more and more collaboration between humans and machines. That culture change will be radically different from the culture change we've had so far, isn't it?
It's an interesting thing. I feel a little bit like ChatGPT and BART have gotten less useful over the last year that I've been using them, in part because you begin to realize where you run into problems. Let's say in collaboration. I have them on my computer, BART and ChatGPT almost all the time. I talk to them sometimes like they're my friends. Sometimes I make them argue with each other to see what they'll do. But you begin to realize there's a few problems. One, if me and you were having a conversation, we could say, how did you arrive at that decision? Or what did you observe? Or what did you experience? ChatGPT can only really tell you what other people experienced, not what they personally experienced. Usually, it's very hard to drill down for different reasons. They don't want to be politically incorrect. They don't want to divulge privacy. They don't want to say anything that might be construed in the wrong way. They've gotten more cagey about how they answer everything. In the organizational learning space is called the ladder of inference. You walk down to the assumptions and see where your experience matches and where the logic goes. You really can't convince ChatGPT so far to logically analyze something or it's logically incorrect. It's not evaluating so much as it's telling you what its findings were. It's adding information, which is good. I do really appreciate about them is bringing in the facts, which is one thing that we're often missing. However, the problem is of people getting together to go through the chain of assumptions that we made to get to different places so that we can innovate, so we can question our assumptions, so we can put things together in new ways. Haven't seen that as much. What they can and can't do is going to be important.
With all the automation that we have created, from Cisco's networks to the availability of really intelligent devices at the edge, you can work from Utah and I can be here in Carmel. The good thing is that there's a lot of flexibility. But what about the challenge of being in an always on world? You can't give the excuse that, sorry, I'm on vacation. Well, you have the device, you can click and start.
Yeah.
So, how do you find that work life balance?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've run across a lot of people who feel oppressed and turn off their devices at certain times. My view has always been that it was actually freeing to have that. The problem is that we feel still hourly based. I was reading a research report on remote productivity. They were saying in COVID times, productivity at home, in one case that they studied in China, was less by the hour than the people in the office. The people at home worked more hours to compensate. Productivity per hour when you're in an always on world is not a sensible way to measure it. The fact that you can answer that question at 8 p.m. is maybe more valuable. You're available to answer it for 10 minutes than saying you cranked out this many emails per hour over a period of time. It does raise questions over how do we measure it, because always on, I think that pressure is you want to be productive, you want to make sure you're providing enough value, and yet you have to have some break from the work. Are we accomplishing the outcomes we set out to accomplish as best we can and to the level that we meet our own expectations?
Having gone through years and years of doing some amazing work, initially technology and later in change management, I still see you up and running, doing things all the time. What is it that motivates you? What is it that gets you up and running early in the mornings and sometimes late in the evenings?
People have been saying to me, when are you going to retire? And I tell them, don't know, not planning on it. I've always been a purpose driven person with goals. And I think I get my satisfaction in life from trying to achieve things. They don't have to be necessarily for money. They could be for other social good projects. I've always just been a purpose driven person and always being a lifelong learner. I have so many things I still want to know and understand and think about. I could just have like a pile of books for 20 years and just read through them. I would be happy to. So some combination probably of being purpose driven and a lifelong learner.
And what are the themes that are of most interest to you at this time in your career?
From a learning perspective, I've been in the recent years much more involved in data science, machine learning, those kind of models, less from creating an artificial intelligence bot perspective, but more from what they bring to research. Because I've always been doing behavioral science research on my own in companies. And that was my background, organizational or social and behavioral trends and what people do and what's the research on how people change. I think now with data science and with big data or always on data, live data being captured from all of these different sources, it adds a whole new dimension to behavioral science research. Even the locus of where you're best positioned to do research is changing. If you're in a research institution, you got to get this data from somebody. If you're in Facebook, Google, you just have the right permissions and you can download real-time data when it's happening and write software to analyze it and run it through models. That area has been really fascinating to me, what we can know and learn about human behavior and performance from pulling together all this data that's out there. And there's also a lot of things we need to be careful about in terms of the privacy, morality, risks, and whether it's improving well-being, which is of course my interest in how do we improve everyone's well-being versus just improving the well-being of a few people's checkbook. That's been one of my biggest areas for learning.
What I noticed is that you moved from change management to increase productivity and profits towards overall well-being of individuals and well-being of communities, environmental causes. What prompted that change and how are you now able to actualize that in your work?
Yeah, it's an area where I was always interested from the beginning. My dissertation was really focused on how to enable better social change. And I went and just was at Cisco and other tech companies. It was a microcosm of the bigger world that was more technical than the outside world. So now my feeling is the whole world's getting technical enough. It's difficult to implement this large scale technology enabled social change in broad society. You probably need thinking skills and the technology. The technology is just getting more prevalent. People are much more used to it. The issues that we faced in Cisco about change and what technology we had available to help are now in society. They're not just inside big companies. So I feel like, okay, I've been practicing for a long time and testing these ideas, and now we're ready to take them to a broader audience. And also we can, having the experience and also the flexibility in my life to do it, I can look more for the work that really appeals and is a good test for these ideas.
And as we've talked about earlier, there's a lot of anxiety with all these advent of these computers and this AI. People are anxious, both on their career front, on their personal front. They don't want invasive technology to take over their lives or the biases and all the things that come with it. What's a good productive way of dealing with this anxiety? How can people use it in a meaningful way?
There's always going to be anxiety about change, and there's always going to be fear and that sort of thing. And we have to remember the value of our social connections. And this goes a little bit back to, we were talking about AI being introduced in the workplace. Just to make an example of it, it's difficult, say, to talk to an AI about what was their exact experience of barbecuing a steak or having a baby. When we have a conversation, say me and you, we say, hey, we should do this. We can agree together that we're going to do that. And we can count on each other to do it. You can't necessarily count on AI to follow through on its commitments to you, to make change in society and to foster positive relationships. We still have to make sure we're talking to real people about things that real people, only we have these bodies, only we have these emotions. What is it going through? What is it like to get older? I think there's a difference between talking to a person about it and talking to a chatbot about it. There's just always going to be, because we have different embodiments. We have different sensors, essentially, of what we're selecting from the world. And we have a commitment to each other. Getting back to the anxiety thing, I think some of it has a lot to do with change. A lot more people are doing things online and being more isolated as a result of COVID and remote work. We have to learn to counteract that a little bit by making sure we're having human connections with people, making sure that we're reaching out to other people, making sure we're letting them know we care about them. People with high anxiety and fear, it helps to have your friends and your family say, don't worry, you'll be okay. It's a simple thing. And to support them, just having those authentic conversations is important. That's one of the aspects we've been working on as an aspect of well-being. When I wrote my book, it's about you have to change yourself to change the world. I didn't think until recently, when Dinesh and I started working together, that changing yourself is habit change. You need to have the skills to make habit changes in yourself. You can't just read it necessarily and do it. But it's actually, you have to change your own habits. Leadership has to actually change their habit to new ways of talking to people, to create authentic conversations, to create empathy. That's been one addition. It always comes down to good relationships. All of organizational change is really about learning and good relationships with people.
Very true. It's not just the theory, but the practice, which reminds me there's an epidemic of loneliness now. With all these communication technology, which are supposed to make it easier for us to communicate with each other, to get things done, there's this huge epidemic of loneliness. It's not clear exactly what's happening, but have you gone into that?
Yeah, I've seen some of those studies. They still relate back to this pulling away from real people. There was some research about people who watch shows like Friends or Seinfeld or something just over and over repeatedly throughout the day. And I thought it was pretty amazing. Okay, I've seen all the episodes once, maybe twice, but I don't watch them continuously. And they did say that people are detached from other people. It's creating a sense of like your friend is there in the room. It's comfortable. It's not too challenging. It's creating some noise. It's like a simulation of living in a house with friends around you. There's just a lot of ways to distract yourself with media and games and the internet. You only have so much time. Flip side of that is if you spend more time watching videos on TikTok, that's less time you could be spending talking to somebody or one of your friends or your family, or making new friends or learning from somebody else. It's a pulling away from people. It appeals to them, but it's not necessarily good for them. It creates some loneliness because you don't have the real people around.
That's true. And with all this stuff going on, our life is changing. And I'm so grateful that you are working on these things, shedding light on this, helping people find that balance. And this is the reason I talk to people. Technology can be tremendously beneficial, can connect us with the world, can speed up things. Yet we can't have a relationship with technology, at least not yet. We still need that human to human connection and that connection with nature. We are out there in ski country with beautiful mountains and snow. And here I'm a day in the sun today. Who knows, tomorrow it's going to rain again. And this kind of deep connection is very valuable. That's why, to people listening, this is why I talk to people, because it is important to understand that technology cannot be created in a vacuum. We are responsible for making sure that this technology works for us in a meaningful way, and our relationship with technology is also harmonious. Otherwise, they will take over our life. Even if they're not our boss, they can still take away our time. And that itself can be very hurtful. So please come forward, tell your stories, tell us what you're up to, what you see, what can be done better. And Doug, it's a joy talking to you. We haven't had this long a conversation so far. What a joy it is to be able to have this human to human conversation.
Well, thank you very much for setting it up. It's been a pleasure.